All right, Doug, good to see you today. Today I would like to talk about Black Lives Matter and the police because it seems like people tend to think, you're on one side or the other, and the all the trouble that's gone on in the US in the last few months, I think has pushed people into their tribes, into their corners. And I just wanted to hear your take on both of those groups and their interaction with each other.
Hmm. Well, this whole Black Lives Matter thing impresses me as a tempest in a toilet bowl, quite frankly. I mean, look, about what's the number? And it's hard to say because of the way people have interbred the races and the way they identify and things like that. But I guess the number is like 13% of the US population are of African descent. Okay, so do they have a beef? Do they have something that they should be pissed off about at this point? I think the answer is yes and no. Uh, sure, slavery should never have existed, but it was common throughout the world since day one up until just the 19th century. And why are they making a big deal out of the United States, or in particular the southern states, still having slavery? I mean, it's all crazy. Look, their ancestors that were stolen from Africa, basically rounded up by other Africans or by Arabs, by Mohammedans that were coming down there and slave trading. So if they really want to blame somebody, they should blame fellow Africans for having sold them to the people that brought the boats to shore, okay? So, I mean, if you want to play the blame game, that's what the blame
You want to
game
go
starts.
to the roots, yeah.
If you want to really go to the roots with this type of thing, right? But frankly, although being a slave is not a good deal, it's funny, I say something like that, and if some miscreant were to pick that up, they're going to say, Doug Casey says slavery is not a good, what an awful person would say slavery is not a good deal. You're supposed to say it's the worst thing that's ever happened. There's lots of really bad things that happen in the world. I mean, I've made the argument for years that maybe, just maybe, we're living on a prison planet, and everybody's on this planet for having committed crimes someplace else in the universe, and that's why we're all here. Fortunately, you and I are trustees, and maybe we'll get out of it.
So
Next lifetime, assuming there's a next lifetime, I have no idea. But anyway, and it's true, I guess, that over 50% of the slaves that were put on these on the boats making the crossing, and about 80% of them went to Brazil and to the Caribbean. Only about 10% of the slaves went to North America. But nobody's raising hell in the Caribbean or in South America, where all the slaves really went. But assuming you survived the crossing, which would have been terribly brutal, there's no question about that, it turned out you probably won the lottery. I mean, your standard of living as a slave was higher than it was in Africa. And your descendants won a super lottery. I mean, it doesn't matter if your mother was a crack whore in the ghetto at this point. You're still like above 98% of everybody that's left in Africa, I promise you, because I've actually been to Africa a lot. And it's not a good place to be a citizen, quite frankly, even though at the same time, I suggest that young Americans that are looking to make their fortune go to Africa because it's an on-level playing field. You want to go where you have things that they don't have. So you can bring something to the party and you'll be rewarded for it. But it's a horrible place to be. So these people are nuts complaining and asking for reparations and all that. They're just nuts. I mean, when the Irish came over here, they were treated like dogs, and a lot of them in the early days came over as indentured servants, which is to say slave for a certain period of time, generally 7 years. So the whole thing is nuts from beginning to
Yeah,
end.
I actually my so I have like many Americans, I had relatives, a relative that came over on the Mayflower, and he was an indentured servant, and he got his freedom over time, and and obviously that certainly I wouldn't be here if he hadn't been an indentured servant for all that time, right? So I mean, it was actually a common way for Europeans to get to the U.S., which was it was a temporary slavery, but it was in fact slavery.
Yes, exactly. He did the intelligent thing. He had to get out of Europe where he was at the bottom of the barrel and come over here
Yeah,
to seek opportunity. It was a smart move, smart guy, actually. So, I'm just flummoxed by it. I understand. I haven't researched this. And of course, it's hard to do research on such a political hot potato like this. But apparently the founders of it are a couple of, you know, uh, ideologically driven Marxist women.
that is what I've heard too. That's certainly what's been widely reported. Yeah, and I but and the reparations aspect is one thing that's there, but it doesn't even seem to be that's the main thrust of their movement. I mean, the thing that's most popular, of course, is the defund or abolish the police,
Hmm.
and and that's which takes us, I guess, to the police side of it. But I wonder if uh, you know, to me, the feeling I've had is that it's America, I believe, is very oriented, recognizes that racism and slavery was deeply, deeply wrong. And because we believe that, to call someone a racist is like universally in America recognized as like really bad. Like someone who's a racist is a serious problem and should be scorned. And it's almost like I feel like Black Lives Matter is playing off that you know internal weakness that we have as Americans, where we all agree that racism is bad, and so they go, well, since you all agree racism is bad, you guys are probably all racist, by the way, and then they use that, they exploit that to just get like a psychic advantage in these Marxist arguments.
Yeah, well, a lot of that's nuts too, but I've got to say something about racism that it's funny when you say anything about race, uh, malcreants will try to twist it somehow. But the fact of the matter is that it is genetic for humans to be racist. And it goes back to really primeval times where you were just living with your little clan and maybe some other clans joined up to be tribes, and you're all genetically related. You all look more or less the same because you interbred with each other. And when somebody from a distant clan came up, they dressed different, they looked different, they spoke differently. They might have been different proto-race, and resources were limited. I mean, you had to grub for roots and berries and kill animals. The supply was limited. So it led to hostility. It meant other person, not my tribe, dangerous, stay away, be careful, keep them at a distance. So this is like genetically bred into humans to be careful about people that are not like them. And it doesn't matter if the not like them means a different culture, different religion, but the most obvious thing is race. You look at somebody, hey, he doesn't look like me. I'm competing for scarce resources. So this has been around for many, many, many millennia. So this is nothing, everybody is racist. And as a matter of fact, having traveled a lot, I can tell you that America is the least racist country in the world.
Hmm.
By an order of magnitude, I'd say. You go to Africa and they are crazy racist. The Chinese are crazy racist. You think, do you think that people of different races are encouraged to move to China by the Chinese? The answer is no. You're never going to be a Chinese, unlike America, where anybody can come here and become an American. So this is actually insane and upside down. Same with India, same with every place, quite frankly. They're like turning it all on its head. I mean, America was founded on a set of ideas. Most of these other countries were founded on people being of the same racial stock. So it's
Mm,
nuts. It really
mm,
is. And the idea of reparations is nuts. I mean, does that mean that every Irishman should get reparations from England because of all the things that England did to Ireland? Well, I guess they should, you know. And this is the case absolutely in every country where the neighboring country came and looted and burned their villages. Hey, that happened. I might still own that house that was burned down 300 years ago. I want you to compensate me for what your ancestors did. This is nuts. It's all completely nuts. It's psychologically deranged. I mean, it's clinically insane. I'm not just
mm,
saying it's goofy. I'm saying that these people are psychologically deranged.
mm. Do you think that do you think that the leaders or the, I mean, it seems like how could the movement have gained so much traction if it's based upon, just psychological derangement? It just seems it's been so effective. I mean, it really has been effective.
Well, you can't underrate stupidity. And we've talked about stupidity briefly in the past.
Hmm.
We have to define it. It doesn't necessarily mean uh, not doing well on a standardized IQ test. I mean, I like to define stupidity as there are two definitions I like to use for stupidity. One is an inability to predict not even the immediate and direct consequences of what you do. Really stupid people can't even do that. But you definitely can't predict the indirect and delayed consequences of what you do.
Mm,
That is a sign of stupidity, where you can't make these predictions in life. It has nothing to do with IQ tests. And
mm,
the second definition I'd give is stupidity is an unwitting tendency to self-destruction. That's
mm,
what it is. And these people are stupid using either of those two definitions. I have no respect for Black Lives Matter whatsoever. I mean, or the people that would join it, or the people that would support it. They are stupid and they are destructive, and there's nothing that can be said for it. What about racism? You know, Martin Luther King was totally right. You choose your friends based upon the content of their character, not the color of their skin. End of story. End of story. And do Black people associate with white people very much today, or white people with Black people? Yeah, when it suits them, but not too much, because they come from different cultures, and this racial thing has been emphasized so much that they tend to be suspicious of each other, even though on television and in the movies, I mean, they're all black and white buddy movies, and all the commercials are black and white. In fact, mostly black, it seems to me, actually 50-50 anyway. That's not the way the world works. I mean, like Muhammad Ali said, hey, you want to hang around with you want people, you want children that look like you. And, I got a lot of respect for Ali on many levels, and he's right.
mm,
Does anybody call
mm.
Ali a racist? It's just a natural genetic thing that you want to de-emphasize because it's smart to de-emphasize. I mean, going back to your genetic problems of thousands of years ago, in a modern industrial capitalist society, you want to forget about that stuff and throw it out.
Mm.
So I don't know if I'm
Yeah.
being clear or not, or if somebody
No.
listening to this is going to say, this is a Ku Klux Klan person trying to justify things.
Well, I think your point about that you just want to de-emphasize these things. You want to de-emphasize them because because they are things that they are not important in the conduct of human relations. And it seems like by emphasizing them, you're basically it's a destructive instinct that is there, that is trying to highlight that difference. It's not just that difference in race,
Right.
it's those other differences in people.
You're right. These Black Lives Matter people are doing the opposite of what they should do. Instead of forgetting about it and de-emphasizing it and getting along, going along, they are emphasizing it and accentuating these things.
Mm.
So there's no excuse for them. And
Hmm.
they brought, you were going to mention, and I rambled on a bit, the police. Then what were we going to
Yes.
talk about with the police?
Yeah, so it's basically the funny, it's strange. The two people are falling in these tribes now because they're in Denver this last week. For instance, there was a pro police, pro what was it? It was just pro America rally is what it really was. It wasn't even pro Trump necessarily, or pro police, but of course there are pro police elements there. So you had on one side essentially this, let's just call them pro police group, and on the other side you had BLM and Antifa. And so it's like things have just been pushed into these two tribes
Yeah,
essentially. And I just, what's your, it's always, people always say, if you're going to criticize BLM, then that must mean that you are, on the side of the police and vice versa. And so, and I think that thinking in itself is a problem, where people jump to, I have to blindly support one side because I object to one or the other.
you're quite correct. And actually, do I support the police? Well, they're necessary, I guess, because there's a certain percentage of people that are criminals in society for whatever reasons. They're just criminals and they do things that we don't like. Okay, so you need people that'll handle them. Okay, but in a free market, in a truly capitalist free market society, you would not have police enforcing laws. You got to draw a distinction. You need somebody to keep order in society, but you can have peace officers and you can have law enforcement officers. And the problem is that the boys in blue today are by training, and of course, most of the police in the country today are ex-military, and that's a totally different mindset than you should have when you're a peace officer. You shouldn't have this military um, mindset where us and they're the enemy.
Right.
And that carries over because most law enforcement guys are military. So that's a mistake, number one. Number two is that they view themselves and call themselves law enforcement. Well, let's look at it. There are thousands of laws, hundreds of thousands of laws. Nobody can know them. And of course, they fall back on, well, ignorance of the law is no excuse. This is
Right.
ridiculous. This is nonsense. Because this is just telling you that the laws are too complex and too arcane and too unknowable. Look, peace officers should have certain powers, and what they have to do is help to make a society peaceable. That doesn't mean enforcing laws, because as we talked about before, I think there are really only two laws. One, do all that you say you're going to do, and two, don't impinge upon other people or their property. Okay, that's pretty simple. Anybody can remember two laws. Those are kindergarten level laws, but they're really all you need when you're relating to other people. And a law enforcement and a peace officer, when he sees a dispute or an altercation or a common law crime being committed, tries to straighten things out based on those two laws, not all the ordinances and things that are passed by.
Right. Yeah, and the thing that strikes me about the law enforcement approach is that you do hear a lot when people are doing things. Well, a couple of examples. One where in Idaho recently there was a church choir was outside singing as doing a protest essentially for the lockdown mandates and the mask mandates and such. And the cops go and they arrest a couple of those members of this church that were outside singing. And they're totally cooperative along the way. Of course, they help. They don't fight the officers. They put their arms around their back, and the cops cuff them and take them to jail. And some people there tried to shame the cops and be like, how can you justify doing this? And of course, the answer fundamentally is they're just doing their job. They're doing their job.
I'm just like the famous comment from the engineer driving the train to Auschwitz during World War II. He said, "Hey, it's not my thing. I was just driving the train, not my fault."
Exactly. And I think that the difference between a law enforcement the attitude about enforcing laws versus the attitude about maintaining peace, as a peace officer, that's the kind of outcome that you can easily justify. And so when people are so blindly supportive of the back to the blue, which is supporting cops, it does feel a lot like kind of an ideological thing, in the same way that people who are supporting Black Lives Matter, it does seem like people aren't thinking deeply about it, especially when you see these cops who basically they stand down while BLM is burning the city. And they say, well, they're not and who can blame an individual cop for not wanting to, because they're being prosecuted. So it's a complicated situation for cops. I do understand that. But when they stand down and sit in Minneapolis burns, I don't know. It seems it's hard to support the cops in a situation like that.
It is. I mean, frankly, most people's encounter with cops today is due to a traffic violation, violating some stupid arbitrary rule. It has nothing to do with safety. It has to do with violating, going a few miles over the limit, that type of thing. And of course, it's funny how law enforcement has changed. When I was years past, if a cop stopped you, it was perfectly acceptable to get out of the car and approach the cop on neutral ground between your two cars and talk about it. That's the way it used to be. It actually was the way it used to be. Now you dare not do that, and you better keep your hands on the steering wheel where you can see them. And the cop, you'll notice, when he approaches your window, is not at a 90-degree angle to you. He's at about a 120-degree angle in back of you in case you're making it harder for you to shoot him. So it's really become quite antagonistic. Actually, I wouldn't defund the police. I would privatize the police. I find that if you live in a closed community where the cop is hired by a relatively small number of people, he really has to be responsible to serve and protect those people who all know him personally. But as I think we've mentioned before, today cops, just like soldiers, are basically their first commitment is to their buddies, second commitment to their employer, and only third is the people they're supposed to serve and protect. That's just the way it is. I'm not saying good or bad, that's the way it is.
Yeah, totally. How do you think that people can avoid the mental, it seems like psychologically where it's easy to be pushed into a tribe, one side or the other. If you're against something, it's almost like before you know it, you find yourself feeling the desire to support what seems like it's opposite, even though it can be as problematic, honestly, as the other side. This is the whole Republican versus Democrat. In most cases, it seems like it's pure theater, but you become against something, and then all of a sudden you find yourself defending things you would never otherwise do. What's the mental trap that causes that?
Well, I like to go between the horns of the dilemma, and although I see no redeeming factors whatsoever for Black Lives Matter and what they stand for and what they've been guilty of and what they're trying to do, the cops, the police it's much more complex. So when people decide, should I hate the police or not hate the police, you've got to rationally draw a distinction for them. Well, do you dislike peace officers, or is it law enforcement officers that you don't like because they're enforcing, like robots, any of these millions of goofy laws that are out there? And I think most sensible, rational people will say, yeah, you're right. I'm all for law enforcement officers, and I'm all for peace officers. Law enforcement officers are a danger. I mean, look, here I am in the crime-free community of Aspen, Colorado right now, okay? And do I feel good or bad about the local cops here? Well, look, the sheriff here used to be a friend of mine, and he was a mellow, peacekeeping kind of guy. But the average cop out here, if I'm accused of some arbitrary, goofy crime, will come here and knock on my door and take me away in handcuffs. That's not being a peacekeeper, a law enforcer. So even in a crime-free town like Aspen, where, no, I'm not particularly a fan of the police because
Hmm.
most of them are law enforcement officers these days.
Hmm.
So that's the
It's great
first
to,
distinction that you got to draw when you're having this discussion with somebody. And
yeah.
they should be privatized. They should not be employed by the state, believe it or not.
Hmm.
They should be privatized and they should be accountable for their actions exactly the way a private citizen is accountable for his actions, as opposed to employees of the state, where because they're, what do they call this, where if you're doing things as an officer of the court or uh, as a member of the government,
Uh,
you're
something immunity. It's
yeah, sovereign immunity, right.
hmm.
So this is a reason why even the peace officers should not be employed by the state. Because why? Because, well, they put their employer's interests right after those of their buddies. And their
Right.
employer should be, it should be privatized and they should be entirely accountable for their actions. So I think
How
those are two main distinctions I'd make.
Okay, so I don't want to go too much into diversion here, but I just, since you brought up the whole privatization of police, how would I I even have a hard time imagining how in a in a, let's just take a town like Aspen, where there's not much, there's really isn't much crime there, as you said, maybe probably really super petty stuff if anything, but like how feasibly could they privatize the police force in a place like that? How would it be run?
Well, okay, practical in a closed community, barrio cerrado, as the Spanish call them. Uh, Simple. It would be something that was done by the condominium and the people that lived
Yeah.
within that barrio cerrado. Uh, how do we do it in a town like Aspen? Well, I think we'd have a lot less police because there'd be a lot less trivial laws to enforce to start with, which makes it less of a problem when you don't have such a big bureaucracy that you have to support. But let me approach it this way: if a crime is committed, would you rather have uh, some cop that's hired based upon who knows what criteria pursue the miscreant, or would you rather have somebody like Mike Hammer or Mannix or Magnum PI or somebody like that pursue the criminal because they have a reason to? It's as
Yeah.
opposed to a flatfoot that's working 9 to 5 and puts away the tools at 5, basically.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that, look, anything that's needed and wanted, and peacekeeping is needed and wanted, and will be, the market will solve it at a profit.
Mm.
So actually, we don't have to figure this stuff out.
Mm. Yeah.
The market will solve it. This is the mistake the Soviets made. It says,
Yeah.
well, if the government didn't make our cars, who'd make them? And they think they've got to, the market does it. You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. I think you're obviously right. I think that where my thinking was flawed, and it was, I was thinking, well, how do you take this geographic area that's a city, and now how would you organize police force there? But it's starting from the wrong route, like assuming that you have to have a police force for the whole city, like that there has to be some police force that has authority over and can monitor and respond to crimes in all parts of the city. I mean, there might be 80% of the city where there's never a problem ever, and where you wouldn't, the market wouldn't necessarily, certain businesses in that area or certain homes in that area wouldn't have a police force essentially at all. They'd have none. And then certain neighborhoods who decided that they needed some, or certain homes that then they would have some more. And then it would kind of be spotty, instead of this idea of theoretic policing blanket that's over the city that protects it, which is of course a fantasy. It isn't really there anyway.
Yeah, let the market decide. And furthermore, I mean, charity begins at home. And if instead of wanting to be protected by the state, how about starting at, hey, wait a minute, I'm responsible for myself and my family. So I have to be able to protect myself and my family first. So, but in today's society, you are discouraged, actively discouraged from protecting yourself and your family. If somebody's invading your house, uh, you're encouraged not to confront the person and shoot him if he breaks into your house, which I think is perfectly acceptable, but to hide in a safe room and cower in a corner somehow. So the whole American society has got things totally upside down. I mean, I don't carry, I think, I think you shouldn't need a license or a permit to carry a gun, concealed or open. I don't carry one. I'm a gun guy. I've got lots of guns, but I don't carry them because you know they're bulky, they're heavy, they're kind of a nuisance to carry with you. Good reasons to carry it in some places at some times. I don't carry one, but I'm happy to see a lot of people carrying them because an armed society tends to be a more polite society. And people with actual criminal intent think twice before they do something stupid when anybody or everybody could be armed. So,
Mhm.
I mean, to start with answering this question of how you get the state out of the police business, start there, and
Mm.
then move to the peace officer concept. And
I love it. All right, Doug. Well, thanks a lot. I'm sure that we'll get some hate mail for this episode for sure. With some discussed a couple of third
well,
rail ideas.
yeah, I know. Well, we'll find more third rail ideas because uh, I like this. This is kind of unexplored territory. Everybody's afraid to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
But frankly, I don't give a damn. Hey, look, I'm rich, I'm old, uh, and I don't give a damn. So they can say what they want.
I love it. Thank you, Doug. We will talk to you again tomorrow. I appreciate it.